Hi, I'm Brandon Cabina. I am captain for SHSU Quadball, and I am host of 3BI, which is a podcast about mostly Southwestern teams, and I'm excited to be here. I don't know if I'm it's just supposed to be, I guess I'll just hop into it. Two of the matchups that I'm kind of excited to see are Rutgers versus UTSA, and then UCLA and Harvard. We made an episode about this a couple of days ago, actually, that dropped right now. So after this, you should go check it out. But those are two of the matchups we saw last year that were a little bit controversial, and so I'm excited to see those again. And I'm also excited to play RPI in our pool because we have two MLQ teammates who came all the way down from New York, and they played with us during the summer, and so we're excited to play against them at Nationals.
I think I'm really excited to see Sam Houston play. I know that they did D2 last year, and this whole entire semester, they've been doing really good playing against UTSA, and they've gone up against, really, really good teams. I'm excited to see them play against Creighton. I feel like that's like the game that I want to watch. Brandon, how do you feel going up against Creighton? I mean, you saw them play at Diamond Cup, and they took the win.
I'm really excited to play Creighton because I think that for a lot of teams, this is like the unanimous number one in my eyes too. And so it's going to be a really great, almost sort of a warm up in order to get the intensity going later on in the day. And I also just want to try a couple new things against them. And after Diamond Cup, I know a lot of my teammates were personally really hoping that we'd see them again this year. And so I'm glad that it's going to be a for sure thing instead of us maybe meeting in bracket later, which hopefully that happens again as well. But
I also have to agree with you on the Rutgers versus UTSA game. I'm also excited to see that. I feel like UTSA has a lot to prove coming back this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And they also just have so many returners from that game, and that's what made me really excited. Plus, I'm friends with a lot of them, and so it's going to be nice kind of cheering for them on the sidelines. No offense, Rutgers, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we started talking about this, and so I guess we'll just get into it since we were talking about Rutgers UTSA. Pool C, obviously, Rutgers is the team that I coach, so I'm not going to go crazy into it, but it's definitely interesting, and I think it's a theme of this entire selection Wednesday, if we want to call it, where it looks like there's a ton of rematches that we saw from Nationals last year, so that's very exciting. I'm actually very interested to see how Illini, who has had some very, very good performances this year. I want to see how they perform. Cal is obviously powerhouse from the West, historic program. So I think this Pool C is a very interesting pool. It'll be one. Obviously, as the coach, I'm not going to go crazy into it, but it's definitely one that I know the RUQ UTSA game, as everyone said, should be well hyped. It should be a lot of fun. And so I'm pretty much looking forward to it. With our top three teams, I do, and again, I apologize to Illini, but I do think it'll be Rutgers, UTSA, and Cal if we were to talk about the top three teams moving on forward. Not in any particular order. I just think those are the three teams that will perform at Nationals. They will perform enough to go to day two. Something that's, I think, just a fun fact about Pool C, I think they have 3 regional champions in this pool, so that's definitely a storyline to follow there. And now I want to get into potentially, we talked about Pool A as well with Sam Houston and potentially a rematch with Creighton where they showed up to Diamond Cup and absolutely trampled everyone they saw. So I'm definitely interested to see the adjustments that Creighton and Sam Houston's made to Creighton. But for me personally, I think this is Creighton's pool to lose. I think Creighton should come out of this very much as the 1 seed. But the 2 seed here is fascinating. I think Florida, RPI, and Sam Houston are all pretty much right there with each other. And these matchups are absolutely phenomenal and cannot wait to see how they match up against each other because I think RPI has started to look a lot more disciplined this year and this semester compared to last semester. And I think their beaters have started to come around. And with Mason DeBuff on their team and Claire Olmstead really popping off at Knights Cup, I think this RPI team is in a potential situation to really take that 2 seed. But with Florida and Sam Houston, this for me, the number 2 seed is very much up in the air, and I'm very excited to see how this plays out.
One thing I'm excited about is Florida. Their main player that I've seen is also named Brandon, so plan on shaking his hand when we're there.
While we're on this,
nice. It's always good to have a name twin or 20. No, go ahead.
While we're talking about Pool A, I wanted to highlight the potential RPI Creighton matchup, which I think is going to be a really physical game. That's going to be a good one. That's going to be one to watch.
I think overall Pool A is looking very physical. You got Sam Houston and Creighton, then RPI.
Yeah,
lots of big
dudes.
For sure. Now, let's just go in chronological order at this point. Let's go into Pool B. And when I first saw this live reaction, my live reaction to this was essentially, this is the pool of death. I think with these teams that you're seeing out here, it's gonna be a bloodbath. And if there's only gonna be 3 teams coming out of Pool B, I don't even want to take a gander into who I expect to come out, because all of these teams can hit. All of these teams are very physical. They're pretty athletic. And that includes the top 5 team in Colombia, where they have Nivas Shayram, who is a MLQ beater for Indianapolis Intensity, who are now Chicago Prowl. But he was that for this Colombia team. And this Colombia team actually was able to match much of Michigan for the first about 5 to 6 minutes against the Ryan Sues and Ray Brodeurs of the world. So Colombia is definitely not the pot 5 team that I think you would want to pull. And especially in this pool where you have Virginia, Harvard, Texas, and UCLA, that's going to be an absolute bloodbath for any of these teams.
Yeah. Also, just the amount of rematches from last national is going to be kind of hype.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're getting Harvard, UCLA back as the that was their very controversial game that happened in the Sweet 16 last year. So to have them be a first round pool play matchup is going to be absolutely electric. And then we have Harvard, Texas, and that game was obviously very much one of the most viewed games. I think it was the most viewed game on USQ YouTube from all the games that were played last year. So people want to watch Harvard, Texas, and that's what they're going to get again. And I think this Virginia, Texas matchup from also I think it was the quarterfinals it was the Sweet 16 from last year. Virginia was 2 goals away from winning it all, from winning that Texas game. And I think they're going to be out here for revenge. They have a very loaded chaser line. They have a bunch of seniors very excited to see what they can do. We'll go from there, because this pool is absolutely the pool of death, and I'm not envying any of these teams' positions.
I'm also excited to see that UVA Texas rematch. I watched it again earlier on YouTube, and it was just a really exciting game. And I think that honestly, a lot of people were surprised by how well the UVA beaters, how well they did against Kaiser and Jack. And so I'm excited to see both teams have grown a little bit. Obviously, Texas lost Jack, but Kaiser's just been doing phenomenal this year. And so I'm excited to see that matchup.
UT and UCLA actually played earlier this year at Heroes versus Villains. UT won 140-100, and I'm looking forward to that rematch. That was a really good game. I watched it. Hopefully UT shows up.
Yeah, I mean, then let's get into Pool D. This is the pool that we haven't really talked about much, but with Pool D, I think for me, this is the pool of life. It's pretty much if there's the top 3 teams that go on to day 2, I think Florida State is a team that most people probably haven't seen, especially in the collegiate scene, because they've been going to they went to CCI, which was a club tournament essentially. They've been playing Florida in the South, and obviously the national media doesn't really pick up the South, which is slightly unfortunate. But I think this Florida State team has shown very impressive results, especially for a team that is fairly young. And the fact that they've beaten Florida this year, and they've also beaten a club team this year at CCI, is very, very interesting. But for them to go up against these Michigans of the world, potentially Mizzous of the world, obviously, and then Brandeis, it's not a great matchup for them, I don't think. And with Michigan, we saw what they are able to do this past weekend. We've been able to see what they've been able to do all year. I fully expect Michigan to win this pool, but this Michigan-Mizzou rematch that we're getting is going to be a rematch from the first big tournament of the year, first big matchup of the year, where Mizzou actually beat Michigan. But ever since then, Michigan's been on a rise. They've been able to take on a bunch of teams, travel. So I'm very excited to see how they rematch and go from there. With Brandeis, this is the young upstart team. They're the story of the year so far out of the Northeast. And I think they have a couple players that have obviously gotten a lot of attention, such as Adrian Koretsky and Eli Fighter. But I think Shakti Kodeswaran is an absolute star. And once people find out about how good Shakti is, I think people will start understanding why Brandeis got to the place where they're at. And so I'm very excited to see how this Mizzou-Brandeis matchup actually ends up going, because I think these 2 teams match up fairly well, and I'm very interested to see how that goes. But in terms of top 3 teams to potentially make it out of pool play, in no particular order, I think it's going to be Michigan, Mizzou, and Brandeis, the way it's listed. I think Penn State is a team that is very scrappy. They're a tough team. They will compete, and they will be out here every single minute trying to play hard. But I just think because of a lack of depth, they might have some trouble playing those 4 full games. And I think that's something that is a storyline where certain teams are having to play an extra game and certain teams don't. And so that might inhibit Florida State and PSU to take on the next step. It'll be interesting because I think some of these teams match up really well against each other.
All right, so last year, Sam Houston, we actually played the 1, 2, and 3 potted teams. in Pool D. And I can tell you, none of those were easy games. We played Mizzou for the D2 finals. Brandeis was in our pool, and so was Michigan. And I think that those are teams that a lot of people might sleep on, but Eli Fighter can shoot like crazy. Michigan has Julian Toyarkov and some of the best beaters in the country. And so I think that it's going to be a lot more of an exciting day 2 for these teams, because I think that a lot of people kind of have their opinions on how day 1 is going to go for this pool. But day 2 is going to be an exciting time to watch these teams. So check them out.
Yeah, because like Mizzou is coming off of that Creighton win. And even going down to FSU, seeing them play at CCI, they had the conditioning for players to stay in for a while against club teams. So it'll be interesting to see, maybe not, obviously teams will have to get through their first games, but how they play after their first 3 games is really going to. Anything else for anybody want to try and make any calls on what might happen after pool play as far as these pools leading into bracket?
I haven't really looked at how day 2 is going to go, but I do want to kind of add on about the FSU thing. I was at CCI as well, just to watch and kind of be a spectator, and they have some players that can hit, and you can tell that their whole team fights for each other, and I love that. I haven't really seen Penn State, but I know that a lot of their alumni have come out of there and been really good quadball players, and so I feel like there's kind of a correlation there somewhere. But yeah, I don't really have any predictions as to how day 2 is going to go. But yeah, I just want to shout out FSU one more time.
No, so for day 2, if you win your pool, you get a bye, but then the 2s and 3s in the pool will play off against each other. So you could get a big advantage by winning your pool and having that extra game of rest there. Since it is just a 12-team bracket, then you'll only have to win 3 games to win the championship.
Yeah, and I think that number of games that are being played is very important in this grand scheme of things, because for certain teams that might not have depth, the fewer games they play might be better for them. And then there are other teams that obviously have the depth and they can play through those games, but do you want to? Because I think I was talking to someone earlier in this year where, according to USQ, and I think USQ takes these into account, after a team has played their 4th game, that's when injuries start to rise. And so that's something that teams will want to figure out. They will want to be conditioned enough that they are not being impacted by that, and then go from there, I guess. But just a little hot take from my end. I think the Final 4 will at least have one Pot 2 team in it. I'm not going to say which Pot 2 team that is, but I think there will be a one lower seed team that makes the Final 4, because I think some of these pools are pretty hard. Some of these pools are they're fairly, like I said, they're the pool that you might want to be in. And so I think this opens up a large part of the bracket for day 2. And I think that will be very interesting, because these matchups that are potentially available for day 2 will be extremely difficult for these 2s and 3s that might have to go on to play each other. And then they have to go on to play a 1 seed afterwards.
Yeah, I think we see a lot at nationals, and there's reason for this too, is we see how well teams have been preparing all year as far as preparing with their conditioning. Because if you're playing smaller tournaments throughout the year, you can definitely use like 1 or 2 games in a weekend to get a really good ranking. And there's still debate whether this sort of thing where you should be able to have enough goods to play 1 game really well, or condition yourself so that you should be able to play 4 and 5 games in a day. And with us going with like the 4 game per day kind of as a standard for nationals, just seeing how well teams have prepared for that, and how much they're able to lean on or not lean on their previous season performance.
You bring up a good point there, and I think that it kind of goes to show, I think day 1 is the day for upsets. I don't know if day 2 they're going to be happening as much, because obviously you got a lot more of those, I guess, lower tier teams out of the way. But with everybody's players being healthy, I think that's the time where some of the other teams are going to get surprised, even if they have more depth. While I think depth is what's going to end up winning this tournament overall, upsets are going to happen on day 1 for sure.
Brennan, what do you think is the biggest upset? Who should be on the biggest upset alert amongst the pools that we're seeing here?
As much as I love Michigan, I kind of feel like Brandeis might come out and show us something. They might be able to do it against Mizzou as well. I think Brandeis, while they have those superstars, but it's those few names that we know. And it's because the depth might not be there as opposed to some of the other teams. But I think on day one, they're going to be out there making a run against some of these other teams and showing us that they're in the D1 bracket for a reason. What about you? What do you think? Do you have any?
I mean, I think
any other ideas?
Like I said, this Pool B is absolutely fascinating because we have Virginia, who's an extremely physical team. We saw what they were able to do at Knights Cup. They pretty much trounced everyone they played. And then we saw Harvard, who didn't look great at Knights Cup, but it was also weather was terrible. They were working in a lot of first-year players, brand new players to their team. So, and we know what Harvard has given us in the past. You know that they'll be ready for nationals. So you know that Harvard will be a tough matchup. Texas, they're notorious for their nationals preparation. So from everything that we've seen from up until now to potentially what we see even the next couple of weeks might be completely different from the team that we see that shows up at nationals. And especially rumor has it that they'll potentially have Tate K potentially coaching them again at nationals, considering this is in Philadelphia. It might be interesting to see what Texas is able to pull off. And again, for as long as you have one of the best collegiate beaters in Kaiser Polzin and the backup, their second string, and if not even one of their starters at this point in Trenton Pescaro, their ability to run their beaters against pretty much any team in the country will keep them competitive against any team in the country. And that's not to take anything away from Purvi, who is recovering from injury from Southwest Regionals, Purvi Mujumdar, as well as Rebecca Papanikolaou, who Rebecca and Trenton have been the second pair to come in after Kaiser and Purvi have their run. And so this beater depth, this beater core is where Texas will make their money on at nationals. Because I think with Texas, something that we've seen pop up the last couple of months is, again, they had such a legendary recruiting class graduate, and they're trying to fill in those roles with first-year players, brand new players, people that need more experience. And that's very hard to do, especially in this sport where experience, for the most part, will get you to higher places than sheer athleticism, right? Like experience will do a lot in this sport. And so I think Texas, for the most part, while they might be young, while they are all of the things that I've said, I think that's a team that if they make a bracket run, I don't think anyone would really be surprised, because it's Texas. They have one of the best beaters in the entire country in Kaiser. And so it'll definitely be interesting to see what they're able to do. And again, we go into UCLA and Columbia. UCLA, they're a very experienced team. They have a lot of seniors, a lot of upperclassmen that are still with this team. And one of them being Justin Van Lyten, who's been with the program, who's able to be a beater for them, chaser for them, just for pretty much fill any role that they're able to take. And then at regionals, we actually saw the return of Cooper Jarrett, who was one of the best freshmen of last year for UCLA. And so they're getting one of their best chasers back, best quad ball players back. They're getting, they have a deep team. They're one of the few West Coast teams that actually has a non-playing coach in Kreger. And so again, this is the pool of death, and it's so unfortunate for two of these teams that might not make it into day two. And then again, we go into Columbia, where they have a non-playing coach in Tad Walters. They have a couple of MLQ players in Joey Shea, Melanie Rolfe, and Nivas Jairam, who they've handled their own. They've competed against some of the best players in the Great Lakes, and the fact that they are the Pop 5 team, I think they'll be able to be competitive against some of these teams for the first maybe 5-10 minutes. But I think as the depth comes in, as the experience comes in, this is where, if you start bringing your second, third string lines in, that's where I think the gap will rise between Columbia and potentially the other teams. But the same could be said for all of these teams. After your first line, first and 1.5 lines, 2 lines, do you have the depth to put in your players, to rest your players? Because you don't want it to be what Sam Houston had to go through at regionals, where they played a lot of their starters for day one, and by the time day two came around, visibly people looked gassed, right? People looked like they couldn't continue going because it was a lot of minutes. And especially in this format, in this game where it's two-handed tackling, longer games, people are being a lot more physical. So that's something that'll definitely be interesting in this pool specifically. So if you're going back to the original question, which was upset alert, I think any of these teams in Pool B should be on upset alert, because I wouldn't be surprised if any of these teams really took it to each other and really balled out. I think of the teams, though, I think Virginia should be the team that really comes out of here and shows everyone why they're the pot one team for this program in this pool. Because I think Virginia all season has really been improving at every single tournament they played at, and their defense is one that's very unique. And so if you're only playing it for the first time, you don't want to play against that defense, because San Siddiqui, Emma Rollins, Andrew Bowman, and Alex Cruz they know that defense down pat, and they have Matt Steelberg, who is a first sub in for them in the quadball game, and they are very exciting to watch. They hit hard and they're very athletic. And so again, Pool B, upset alert. Every single team should be on upset alert. Amongst those teams, I think Virginia should be safe is what my gut tells me.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting because I think there's at least one player from every one of those teams in Pool B that the other teams aren't going to be ready for. They're not going to prepare for them. And so that's what I'm hyped to see. I'm excited to see Cooper Jared back because we played him last year at Nationals and nobody was prepared for that, man. So I'm excited.
And joining us right now is Swathi Menon, who just came off of practice. So Swathi, thank you so much for joining. There's been a lot of conversation in the last 30 minutes or so about this pool that y'all are in. And obviously, as one of the panelists here and as one of the representatives here as a panelist, I'd love to hear your take about where y'all landed potentially in this pool, and then obviously potentially any matchups you're looking forward to, especially with two rematches from last year's Nationals.
Yeah, so we were talking about it, and we think it's interesting that we have two rematches from our pool, from Nationals last year. We are definitely looking forward to playing those games again, and looking forward to how those teams have developed this year as compared to last year. We've been watching film on all of these teams so far this year and are interested to see how it plays out at Nationals compared to throughout the year. Additionally, we know that we're interested to see how the two pools of 5 are different than the pools of 4 and how that extra game might affect day 2 in terms of injuries, in terms of player stamina, as a result of having to play that instead.
I guess my final thoughts with college is essentially this should be very, very fun. I think in previous years we've had pot 4, pot 5, sometimes even pot 6 teams where the parity is just not going to be there, and in these games are fundamentally you're just not going to be close. And the fact that USQ decided to go with a D1 D2 split, I think, is very important. I think for the longest time, whenever we said split, we talked about the club college split. But now going forward, whenever someone says split, this actually might mean the D1 D2 split, because I think the parity right now in the sport, it's very interesting, because I think 1 through 11-ish, 1 through 12-ish, I think all the teams can play each other very competitively. But outside of the 12, I think that's where the D2 portion comes into play and really will be interesting, because I think for the most part, I think D2 games will be a lot more competitive than D1 games. And I think these teams will be matching up against similar talent levels. And I think that will make for much better games in terms of the competitiveness, in terms of the finishes, in terms of just how much fun each game appears to be. So I'm very excited for Nationals. I cannot believe it's 17 days away or so. So looking forward to everything that college has.
And I may be biased, because I'm from the Southwest, but I'm really excited to see all of my Southwest teams play out there. Sam Houston, UT, and UTSA. I'm rooting for y'all.
We're rooting for you too, by the way.